Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute. If you think back into the 20th century and before that as well, the 19th century, Hawaii was known as an agricultural center of the world. Great crops included pineapple and sugarcane, and the industry rivaled all other industries at one point. But take a look today. Something has happened, and the prominence of agriculture here in the Aloha State has dropped significantly. Agriculture is facing significant challenges, and yet at the same time, there are wonderful, promising opportunities. And perhaps at the nexus of this, we've got the gentleman whom I'm able to interview today, working very, very hard at the University of Hawaii to help build a better future for Hawaii and Hawaii agriculture. His name is Steven Chiang. He's the head of GoFarm, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But he's also the Agribusiness Incubator Program Director there at the university, working to raise up men and women who can use the latest technology and marketing in order to build agriculture as a thriving business opportunity and industry here in the state of Hawaii. So we're going to chat a little bit about what's going on in agriculture, what can be done to solve the challenges, and where we're going to go in the future. Steven Chiang, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great. You know, I saw you recently at one of those talks. What do they call them?
TEDx Honolulu.
TEDx, that's right. TEDx Honolulu. You did a great job.
Thank you.
You really know your stuff and have a passion for it.
That I do, yeah.
Now, your day job at the university, tell us a little bit about that. You're in the agriculture incubator program.
So for the past 11 years, we've been working through federal grants to provide business consulting services to Hawaii's agricultural businesses. The word agribusiness sometimes has a certain connotation, right? What's interesting is the reason that program was created was because of the transition in agriculture from plantation to smaller, more diversified.
And we've got to equip entrepreneurs, really, in order to make it happen here in the state of Hawaii. Now, there's a program we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about later on called GoFarm. Just briefly, what does that do?
GoFarm Hawaii develops new farmers for the state, provides very practical training in business production and hands-on skills. There's a lot of people with interest in farming, not so much experience in farming. And so these programs that are located across the state help folks who are interested become farmers.
Well, it's a great program, and there's a tremendous need to help people become farmers today.
There is.
Well, there has been such a shift in the prominence of agriculture here in the state of Hawaii. There was a time when we were known for our sandalwood or our pineapple, our sugar, and so forth. And we've seen really the demise of all of those industries. We no longer have what we used to call big agriculture. What are some of the causes of this?
Global competition primarily. If you think about just in the past 30 years, let's say, we had pineapple and sugar as our main crops. Coffee is an important industry, and it has come up in the past decade or two. But pineapple and sugar were really our big exports. And as people found it cheaper to produce elsewhere, we've seen those plantations decrease in size. I mean, you've heard about what's happened to HCNS on Maui.
Right, Hawaii Cane and Sugar. That was the last of the big sugar plantations. And if I understand correctly, when they shut down, or will shutter very soon this year, it will represent a loss of 78% of Maui's ag land.
That's entirely believable. I mean, that's 38,000 acres, so that's a big chunk of land that will be coming out of ag. Now, HCNS has made some communication about being committed to keeping the land in ag, but I personally don't see 38,000 acres being put back into productive ag use, at least not for a long time.
There are a great many challenges to that, some of which we may address today: the water supply, the political environment, and so forth. Now, yes, it's a well-known fact that we've seen the demise of big agriculture, but Why hasn't that been replaced by smaller forms of agriculture to a large extent?
Primarily, I would say, well, there's two reasons in my view. One is economically challenging. There's many easier ways to make money if that's your goal.
You mean it's hard to farm?
It's hard to farm.
You actually have to get out there and work.
Right. It's economically challenging to be viable in farming, especially at smaller scales.
Sure.
It's also, you have to remember, when you have a farmer, a farmer is an entrepreneur, right? Like any other small business person in a sense. So not everybody who's interested or willing to do all the hard work. First of all, hard work is one, okay? You have to know so much about so many things. Having been involved in agriculture, I've gained a tremendous amount of respect for all the things you need to know, right? Weather, pest diseases, soils.
So it requires a scientific background, really,
Right.
a technical background, as well as the marketing, business, finance, and other
Right.
issues.
Everything that a small business person would need to know. And so all those requirements to be successful. And then, of course, we have a generation of folks who have been actively discouraged from farming, right? You have people on plantations telling their kids, don't do farming, but that's different.
Well, isn't there some misunderstanding then about what modern farming is all about? Well, when we talk about farming today, it's really not living on a plantation and toiling in the hot sun all throughout the day. And if that's the image that a lot of young people have, I can imagine that it's not going to appeal to them very much at all.
Yeah, farming, I would say your sort of stereotypical modern farm is much different. It's endlessly interesting, and to interesting we can add challenging, and that's what makes it so interesting, and it's endlessly rewarding. And so, which is why we're seeing this big uptick in interest.
Well, it sounds like that's a good thing, but it still sounds like there's a public relations issue that needs to be challenged and addressed, and that is making farming look a lot more jazzy.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like tilapia. Okay, I'll make this analogy.
Okay.
People eat tilapia on the mainland. It's on the restaurant menus. Here in Hawaii, there's an association with up the alawai, right?
That's right.
Tilapia is dirty
Bottom
fish.
feeders on the alawai.
Right. So these aquaponics growers, the guys who have fish and vegetables in a system, they're having some marketing challenges overcoming the local perception of it. And so there's a couple of things going on with the perceptions of agriculture now, right? There's sort of that old vision of what agriculture was, and now there's this new, more modern vision of what agriculture can be. And they both exist at the same time.
So we're in a period of transition. Now, let's go back a little bit to some of
Okay.
the challenges. We mentioned the need for technical knowledge, the hard work, the vast knowledge of the business cycle needed for marketing through
Right.
finance and so forth. Doesn't farming also, especially at the small scale level, entail a great deal of risk?
Right. So on some level, farming can be considered like manufacturing, right? You're manufacturing food. But unlike other forms of manufacturing, you're inordinately dependent on things out of your control. Weather, you can manage pests and disease, but you can't prevent it, right? So things like that can come in and really destroy, 6 months of work and investment in ways that other manufacturers really don't face. And so the appetite for risk, again, it's hard to be financially viable, and then you have to be financially viable to the degree that you can absorb these kinds of risks.
Right.
Right, so it's very challenging.
And these risks take place in an environment here
Right.
where we have many, many participants in the public sphere
Mm-hmm.
who care about the environment, who care about health, who care
Right.
about particular issues, and appeal to quite a complex regulatory system. How do farmers face those kinds of challenges?
In a couple ways. Let me address the regulatory challenges. One way to address regulatory challenges is to ignore them and put your head in the sand and pretend that they don't exist, like, say, the Food Safety Modernization Act. Right? Everybody's heard of it, they know it's coming, but they may feel like, well, I'll deal with that when it really affects me instead of preparing for it, instead of being proactive. Or they won't bother me because I'm too small, right? So that's usually not a wise approach. The other way is to, of course, comply with the regulations. So what's happened is you have a group of very small farmers who, by and large, get away without complying with many things. Okay? I'll just stereotype it. And then you have a group of mid-sized and larger farmers that go through the expense and hassle of complying. And that leaves this sort of gap that to make the transition from here to here is very tough, right? Because as you can imagine, if I'm going to comply and go expend all the effort and expense of complying with all the regulations, it would behoove me to be of a certain size to absorb those costs and that effort. So to make that transition is tough.
So it's very difficult to be able to live up to all of those regulations. And so there's always that
Right.
temptation to simply ignore them or let them go until they actually
Sometimes.
come knocking on the door. And when it comes to dealing with much of the democracy that we have,
Mhm.
we're a free country. People are free to express their views.
Mhm.
They're free to protest.
Right.
But farmers themselves are impacted to a great deal because their businesses are on the line when we're faced with various protests.
Right. I mean, we have, for example, the seed industry in Hawaii, right? This is what we see a lot of protests against. I'm of mixed feelings because the seed industry supports agriculture in general across the board
Right.
simply by being here and doing business and utilizing the services that other farmers use. And then you have, little smaller scale, you have folks like papaya farmers. Many papaya farmers happen to be using genetically modified papaya varieties. But, if you go and visit these farmers, these are not the corporate face or whatever people are imagining. These are small family farms, and we've heard of folks being vandalized, being threatened, and so forth. And so it's very sad,
What's the quality of information that is out there in the public with respect to genetically modified organisms or even pesticides and so forth?
Yeah.
Because there's so much
Right.
heated
Right.
debate, but from your technical background, what would you say the quality of information is?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to set the record straight, I don't have a technical background, right? I'm not one of the professors at the university, but from my perspective, rather, the information is very mixed in terms of quality, right? So you have folks saying this, folks saying that. They directly contradict. But when I look at it from a high level, there seems to be a lot of misinformation.
Mm. There's a lot of challenge here because there's a lot at stake for many people.
Right.
People feel very deeply
Right.
about the environment or about personal health.
Yeah.
But we also have to allow people to make a living and to be able to advance in industry. Just real quickly before we go to
Sure.
break, how would we balance some of those concerns?
Well, agriculture, okay, I'll point out, is unlike many other industries because there's so much emotion involved in agriculture, right? It's kind of a primal thing. It's food.
That's right.
It involves
It affects everyone.
direct integration with the land. And so it won't be a sort of, we can't approach it coldly, right? We should recognize that it's not just another industry we can approach very logically and coldly because it is inseparable, I think, from all the things we care about.
Well, I want to ask you about a holistic approach when we come back from
Sure.
a short break, as well as your thoughts on how we're doing as a state government in particular,
Okay.
in terms of promoting agriculture. My guest is Steven Chiang, the founder and director of GoFarm. We're going to be talking about the farming industry as well as how to promote and build it and bring new people into it right after the short break. Don't go away.
Aloha, namaskar, and hello. My name is Anu Hittel, and I host a show, Climate Change Beyond Outrage. In it, we go beyond outrage to look at solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. Join me every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Hawaii Standard Time. See you then.
Aloha, my name is Justina Spiritu, and I'm the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and you can catch us every Thursday at 4 p.m. at thinktechhawaii.com. What do we talk about, Matt?
So on Hawaii Farmers Series, we're going to be bringing on the farmers and also supporter of farmers, including restaurants, caterers, as well as government supporters and nonprofits to hear their background stories and understanding our local ag community just a little bit better.
Yeah, essentially, there's a lot more that goes into farming and the local food community beyond just producing the food. And we want to feature and get the background story on all these folks and see how we all work together as a community. So join us every Thursday. Aloha.
Well, welcome back to our second segment of E Hana Kako. We're here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. E Hana Kako sounds like that venerable Hawaiian saying, E Pule Kako, which means let's pray together. At the Grassroots Institute, we also like to say, E Hana Kako, let's work together. Let's all work together for a better economy, government, and society, because think of the terrible alternative of not working together. And that's why we like working together with Think Tech Hawaii. We tip our hat to Jay Fidel and the great crew here that are producing about 30 to 35 hours of content from Honolulu every week. Interesting stuff ranging from politics to science to the arts. And you can find all of that on thinktechhawaii.com. My guest today, Steven Chiang, founder of GoFarm Hawaii, is somebody who's doing something about the future of Hawaii, helping people to learn how to do farming and do it well for the sake of the industry. But before we go to Steven, we're going to take a call. And we have a caller now. We'll just put him or her on the air. Aloha. Welcome to E Hana Kako.
Aloha, Keli'i. Yeah, I have a question for Steven.
Absolutely.
My question is, you talk about, the risk and the fact that you're going to have a bad season, lose all your money, not so swift. What about co-ops?
All right.
What about a way, even insurance or co-ops or some sort of investment process by which you can cover the risk, ameliorate the risk, level the risk of the small farmer?
Well, I'll give that question to Steven. You know, with all the risks of doing agriculture and going into the business, how well do co-ops work as a solution to kind of spread the risk around and give people a better advantage at being able to succeed?
Sure. So I'm going to give you a little bit longer answer.
Sure.
Co-ops make a lot of sense, right? And folks who are considered industry professionals, like I'll consider myself one, co-ops are very attractive. The problem comes usually in the implementation. Historically, co-ops work best when they're limited to a single commodity, like we all do grain, or we all do Maui onions.
Right.
More recently, we've seen co-ops around more diversified crops. And co-ops exist for a couple of reasons. To give buying power, we can all buy together in greater volume, or to give marketing power. We can sell and not compete with each other, but maybe gain a better price by having that. The problem typically comes, at least historically, in having people who are traditionally independent work together, right? So one example might be, we all agree we are all gonna sell our vegetables here, whatever that is, at 10 cents a pound. But some guy outside is willing to pay me 11 cents a pound. So now, instead of complying with the agreement and selling it through the co-op at 10 cents a pound, I'm gonna sell some of it to that guy at 11 cents a pound. And that just weakens the power of the cooperative, as you might imagine.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's that delicate balance between cooperation and competition.
Right.
Both of them are very powerful factors in driving any industry forward. And that brings us to this question, really, about the role of government itself. Because with government, sometimes we don't necessarily increase competition. We don't necessarily increase cooperation. What are your thoughts about how our government is doing to address the fact that we've lost so much agricultural land over the last many decades, and we don't seem to be replacing it with viable farming to a high level yet?
Right. So I think the government has good intentions. There is some sense that maybe it lacks a specific vision to move everything toward. But to be fair, there's been initiatives to open up farmlands recently, and I applaud the government for that. But we've also seen examples where a lot of acreage is opened up for farming, but because it's not the complete picture, right? Here's just farmland that you can farm. Because you don't have all the other things that's required, it goes unfarmed.
Well, I think would you say part of that is because the political picture may not always be comprehensive? We often have bills and various political movements to increase farmland, to buy land and set it aside as ag land.
Right.
But as we look at this land that has been set aside, it may not have all the things needed to become productive, and so it lies fallow for many decades.
Yeah, some examples are you have a piece of land but no road to access it, or you have a piece of land and there's no well to bring water to the area, or the irrigation infrastructure isn't working. But those are, of course, big obstacles to going on and actually farming the land. Right? So there's this concept called accessibility of farmland. Housing is one example.
Yes, that's right.
If you could put a house on every piece of land, you'd have a whole bunch of new farmers.
But that's not necessarily allowed on much of the agricultural land.
No.
But it would make a huge difference for a farmer
Right.
who could live on his land and protect it and raise family on it.
Right, and simply to go out for 5 minutes and do something versus to have an hour commute to do that 5-minute task, right? It's a really big deal. I mean, issues are complex, and I certainly understand the point of view of the landowners. Having people live on your land adds a lot of complications. So I understand that, but we've really moved away from the model of, if you're farming, people just assume you're living on the farm, if you think about it, right? I'm talking 50, 100 years ago, to now where farming is a place you go to do that, and it just adds one more challenge to an already challenging occupation.
Sometimes in certain sectors, I see very clearly articulated visions, like the Clean Energy Act and vision, or everybody, 75% of the population having college degrees by a certain year.
Right.
Other than once in a while labeling things as made in Hawaii,
Right.
I'm not sure I see our government actually giving a very clear-cut direction that is comprehensive for the building of an agricultural industry.
Yeah, I haven't seen something that's specific either. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but I haven't run across it.
Well, let's get back to something that is near and dear to your heart, and that is helping to build a new generation of farmers. One of the reasons being, of course, that we don't have enough people. Is it true? People to go into farming opportunities.
Oh, very true. If you look historically or across the U.S., the number of farmers has been decreasing over the past 3 decades, at least.
So it's a nationwide cultural shift.
It's a nationwide shift. In Hawaii, if you look at a statistic called the average age of the farmer, the average age of the farmer in Hawaii is like 60 and a half years old. It's higher than the national average. So what that age reflects is the fact that there's not folks coming into the pipeline from the younger years, right? So if you look at the age as an indicator, you can see that we are even more behind the curve than the nation as far as replacing our farmers.
Right.
And that's troubling. I mean, like I recently said, we are expressing an interest in agriculture. We're opening lands, there's the initiatives going around, all these farmers markets opening up, right? So the public, we the people, are expressing an interest in agriculture, yet the reality is that the number of farmers is decreasing.
Well, tell us a bit about your initiative, GoFarm, which is designed specifically to counter this trend away from farming.
Right. So some of, and I'm going to diverge a little bit before I get back to that. We see a number of initiatives that are focused on, let's say, mid-sized farmers, and I think that's great, right? They certainly need the support. My issue is that there are a finite number of these mid-sized farmers. And in the long pipeline of becoming a mid-sized or larger farmer, if you don't fill the pipeline at the beginning, then really you're building it for nothing. So what GoFarm Hawaii does is it aims to capitalize on the current interest, because we see that there's a lot of interest in farming right now. And not just young people, by the way, but in general. We want to capitalize on this interest and get people into farming, right? Train them how to farm, give them the science fundamentals on what to do with nutrition and diseases and pests and so forth, and have them actually farm.
And what is the process one goes through in the program? After applying to get into the program and being accepted, what happens?
Okay, So to capitalize on the interest, like I said, we want to reach as many people as possible. So it starts off with a simple seminar called Ag Curious. We can handle 120 people at these things, and some portion of them apply to what's called Ag Exposure.
Okay, so Ag Curious is a recruitment kind of opportunity.
Yeah, it's a seminar, informational, but it's also to recruit. Ag Exposure takes 20 of these applicants and takes them to various farms where they work, right? Am I really okay sweating in the sun and getting my hands dirty? We take them, we try to expose them to big ag, little ag, all sorts of things. If they still think they like it, if they're still interested, then they can apply to ag school. And this is our first formal training. 4 months of working in your own plot, kind of large garden size, producing great vegetables and learning the fundamentals of production. If after that, they still think, yeah, I think I want to pursue becoming a production farmer, we have Ag Pro. Ag Pro, 6 months, 1/8 of an acre. It's pretty intense. It gets real intense, and business plans and actually selling your produce, working on a tractor, all these sort of things.
How many people have graduated from the program since its inception?
I did this statistic recently. I think about 150.
And how many of them are actually in business as farmers now?
Again, I think we did this number recently, like 20, 25, I want to say.
How are they doing?
They're doing okay. Farming, as it turns out, is a long road, right? You don't just hang up your shingle and say, I'm a farmer.
Right.
There's a big learning process in terms of farming your land, especially with the sustainable organic methods, building your soil, gaining proficiency, not just in the production, but also with that variety of plant. Winter is different than summer, even in Hawaii, these sorts of things. And so we have folks in the next phase, which is called Ag Incubator. This is where, within the safety net of our lands and our machines, they can start their own farm businesses. And so we have folks in there coming on 2 years now.
Now, this sounds like a high-tech startup model,
Yeah.
Sort of a Silicon Valley kind of approach to it, the Pro Incubator.
Right, because if you remember, farming is high risk, and you're not just doing a job, you're entering a high-risk occupation as an entrepreneur, typically, right? Some of our successes have been folks getting jobs in agriculture, interestingly enough, not as field workers, but as a reflection of the interest in agriculture and the dearth of farmers, our folks are being hired to farm for other people, right, to run their farms. But anyway.
Well, that's a start for them.
Right.
Is that your ultimate vision?
No, it wasn't at first, but
people see the value of the training.
Right, and so.
And then maybe that'll be a pathway for these people to get into their own business if they should so desire.
And some of the folks, so that's happened to a few. The other folks that are pursuing farming for themselves, they're running their own businesses now and selling and so forth.
Well, it sounds like a great contribution to the industry, at least. Yeah. Although it's small, it has the potential for growth. Are you looking for growth in the program?
We are. Right now, we've expanded from 1 location to 4. So we're on.
Are they on different islands?
Maui, Kauai, 2 on Oahu.
Okay.
Right, and we're looking at a big island.
Well, hopefully you'll inspire some new great agricultural industrialists for the rest of the century. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Steve, what I'd like to do is chat a little bit about the direction of agriculture in the future, how we can diversify, what type of agriculture is available to us through technology and so forth, and maybe some of the things you've learned in your international travels.
Okay.
We'll be right back after the short break. Again, my guest, Steven Chiang, the head of GoFarm, talking about the future of agriculture in Hawaii. Don't go away.
Aloha, my name is Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm the host of Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. We air live on the internet and also on Oceanic Channel 16. I'd invite you to come for a fresh new show every Tuesday from 12 to 1 o'clock. I try to bring on guests that give us a different viewpoint on aspects of sustainability in Hawaii, as well as trying to unpack some of the difficult concepts of measuring and achieving sustainability, particularly with regard to sustainable economic growth and prosperity in Hawaii. Please join us every Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. Mahalo, aloha.
Welcome back to our final segment today of Ehana Kako, talking about the future of farming in Hawaii. I'm with Steven Chiang of the University of Hawaii, who sponsors incubator programs, and one in particular that takes people through all the fundamentals of farming is GoFarm. Stephen, as we look at farming today, it's going to be very different for Hawaii if we're going to gain anything close to food self-sufficiency. We're not going to necessarily have the big crops like sugarcane or pineapple, sandalwood definitely. What are we going to be able to do if we really want to move ahead in terms of providing our food security and our food self-sufficiency to some extent?
Right, so these are the big questions. And we get asked this question on a micro scale, what do I grow? And that's usually looking from a market opportunity standpoint.
From the entrepreneur's point of view.
Right. And so, you know, this sort of standard answers are grow what other people aren't growing. In Hawaii, we're lucky enough to have enough climates that you can actually grow just about anything. You'd be surprised. Maybe not economically, but you can grow it. And if you are the only guy or gal growing that thing, then your lack of efficiency, let's say, could be made up by the greater price you get for it, because there is a demand for local that can command a premium. Okay, but to answer your original question about food self-sufficiency, you know, I don't see 100% as necessarily the goal. As you mentioned, my international travels, you know, there's really almost no place I've seen that considers 100% self-sufficiency as a realistic goal. Having said that, you have to remember that the amount of acreage in agriculture in Hawaii, I'm not talking historical ancient Hawaii, but you know, from plantation days, was not for consumption here. It was for export.
Right.
Right, so I don't see turning all of those acres into local production.
What kinds of crops would be particularly well suited for Hawaii's own consumption? Vegetables, naturally.
Right, there's a lot of fruits
Fresh
and vegetables
produce.
grown here. It's often quoted 80 to 90% of our food is imported. That's an interesting number because that number, if you'll notice, there's a lack of reference when they quote that number.
That's right.
And I happen to know where the number came from, but it's 80 to 90% across the board, so it includes breakfast cereals and things we aren't going to necessarily even want to produce here. So in fruits and vegetables, you might be looking at, we might be producing 30% of what we consume, or up to something like that. So those things we will continue to produce. Things where freshness matters, right? There we have a competitive advantage to grow it here and consume it here. Things that get damaged in transport might have an advantage growing here. But what we need here is something we don't do enough of, and that's your proteins and your starches.
Well, when you talk about proteins, we're in the middle of an ocean full of fish and so forth. How are the efforts to take advantage of that in terms of either harvesting of fish directly from the sea, or new forms of technology that allow us to develop aqua industries?
We actually have a very innovative aquaculture industry. Between open ocean cages for fishing and on land aquaculture, Hawaii is doing a lot of things right. The regulations, of course, put us at a disadvantage over other certain countries with less rules around that. But Hawaii is a source of innovation there. If you go down to Nelha, on the Big Island, where they're bringing that deep ocean water up, they're doing a lot of stuff with like abalone and things like that. So I'm sorry, I lost track of your question.
Well, we're looking at the different forms of diversified tech infused agriculture and protein production, and we were talking a little bit about fishes. Let's switch it for just a moment to some of the vegetable and fruit crops and so forth. Aquaponics, isn't that a pretty exciting new direction here in Hawaii, and we're making some headway there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of interest in aquaponics. Aquaponics is not unique to Hawaii. I don't even think we have a necessarily geographic competitive advantage in this, but the interest is definitely there. And part of that interest is because it's a very integrated system with relatively low inputs on the vegetable side.
In fact, why don't you explain for our viewers a little
Sure.
bit about the system of aquaponic production?
So basically aquaponics, you're growing vegetables in a hydroponic system, meaning that the vegetables are not in dirt typically, right? There's water circulating.
Right.
In the water
So then it reduces the need for land.
and water.
And water as well, because of
The water is in a system
recirculation.
recirculating. The nutrients that feed the plants actually largely come from the fish. The fish
In other words,
are within the same system.
Waste.
Right. And the plants serve the fish by cleaning the waste out of the system, thereby giving the fish the oxygen and cleaner water that they need to thrive.
It sounds like a very ideal ecosystem.
Right. It is, and it's really neat. Economically, it hasn't been a home run. It's not as easy as people like to think.
And why is that?
Cost of fish food is a big one.
We can't bring the fish food in on mats and
Right.
containers?
This is another thing. This is another thing we import. Okay? And if you think about fish food is made out of fish. Interestingly enough. So the cost of feed's a big obstacle. Cost of power if you're not using renewables to run all these pumps.
Where do we get our feed right now? Is it imported?
It's
or
imported.
It's not manufactured here?
No.
With all the fish that are around us and all
No.
the plants and things that could be converted
Right.
into fish feed?
Yeah. There's a lot of things that depend on scale. Okay, so there's a lot of research going on that are looking for ways to convert certain waste agricultural products or waste streams into food, any kind of high protein animal feed, whether it be fish or pigs or whatever, right? They all need expensive feed.
Well, and this is an interesting issue here that brings us to the intersection of the private sector and government. When there's such a need as, let's say, some kind of mill in order to grind up product to become fish food and so forth, but no one small business or handful of businesses could possibly afford that because of its scale. How do we solve those kinds of problems in public-private partnership?
Interesting. This is the title of the conference in Indonesia. But my personal opinion is I'd rather not see government in everything. On the other hand, when we have market failure, in other words, when the free market forces are not resulting in creating something that you need or want, then I see a very specific role for government. Okay, like you mentioned, we don't have the scale of industry here to create something like a feed mill, right? And yet, the lack of creation of a feed mill constrains the size of the industry, so it's chicken and egg. And so I do see a role of government to identify these gaps and these opportunities.
Alternatively, government can loosen up on taxes and other costs and so forth, and infuse the market with more money. But still, we've got to find some solutions. So how are we? How would you evaluate Hawaii in terms of our technology for advanced farming as we move forward?
We're actually quite behind.
Is that right?
Yeah. Even though we are part of a first world nation, there's many other places I've seen who use technology much more intensively.
So when we see all of these wonderful examples of technologically infused farming, aquaculture, and so forth, these aren't the norm then here in Hawaii, is what you're saying?
No, and I guess I was speaking of more traditional crops, land-based crops, and it has a lot to do with scale. These are, when you talk about technology, at least high technology, okay? Technology as a word can apply to a lot of things, but high technology requires capital. Capital typically requires scale for people to make that investment. And we with the loss of plantation agriculture, there's just really a lack of businesses of enough scale.
We talk about capital coming into Hawaii in order to help us in our agriculture industry. I think of the super ferry because farmers were excited about that. I remember when we had the super ferry, neighbor island farmers at every scale were excited about being able to just load up their trucks and head to another island. So we've been very much hurt by that. In the same way, you mentioned the need for capital. Does Hawaii look like a safe investment climate for people to invest in large-scale agricultural products for
Large-scale.
agricultural projects?
Across the board, if you look on average, I would say we are not the safest environment to invest in. Agriculture, by the way, doesn't necessarily attract a lot of investment in the first place. We're seeing trends in very high-tech agriculture investment. Your more typical venture capitalists, they want to make a lot of money quickly.
Right.
They don't mind taking high risk if there's a promise of high reward. Agriculture, traditionally is more risk over the long term. You have to have a long-term view. We also see investment in agricultural land that doesn't necessarily bode well for your farmer, right? These are speculators buying up farmland. But Hawaii, as far as investments in Hawaii agriculture, the one thing we have going for us is, if you think about it, because technologically we're at a relatively low base, there's a lot of room for improvement, right? Also, the demand is here, the consumer demand, the brand of Hawaii carries a lot of weight around the world. But if we focus locally, we're really about feeding ourselves. Right? How do we increase our productivity? There's still not enough farmers to even take advantage of the things that government does do.
Well, we've just got a couple minutes left, but I know you've traveled quite a bit and you've seen agriculture in other nations. Anything you've gleaned that we might be able to apply to our situation here?
There are government initiatives that target certain industries. Like in Taiwan, we'll see orchids, right?
Right.
We think of orchid as a Hawaii flower, but there's a lot of orchid leis coming from Thailand and so forth. But the government will get behind a certain sector of the industry and will really support it to the point where it's a sufficient enough scale where it can support itself, right? All those initial capital investments and so forth, coordination and investment. There's been some of that here, not enough. Even at the university, I think, as far as getting behind a certain sector and industry has not happened to the degree that it had back when we had this, that, the other thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And government involvement can also be a mixed bag, depending upon where they
be careful what you ask for.
They choose to sponsor. Well, I want to thank you for being with us today. And can you tell our audience how they can get a hold of you if they're interested in GoFarm? Sure.
We have a great website. Well, it's a website, www.gofarmhawaii.org.
All right, Steven, thank you very much. Enjoyed the conversation. And
thank you. It's been fun.
My guest today, Steven Chiang, who is the head of GoFarm. He's at the University of Hawaii. Go ahead and look him up. It's a great program. And more than that, it's been a great conversation about doing something that Hawaii needs to get done, and that is really to build our agriculture industry. Until next time, I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroot Institute. E hana kākou. Let's all work together.
You're watching Think Tech Hawaii, Hawaii's leading digital media platform for civic engagement, raising public awareness on tech, energy, diversification, and globalism. Great content for Hawaii from Think Tech.